Hi. So I just wanted to give you guys a small update about the channel because maybe you have noticed that like about 3 weeks ago, my reviewing upload rate slowed down a bit. It's because of the whole virus madness that is going on currently. Many things like when you go to the bank or when you go to the supermarket, you need to do these really long lines because of the social distancing. So it has taken more time than expected when you carry out your daily chores. But now I've adjusted a bit to that sort of way of doing things, and I hope I can speed up my reviewing process now. Well, coming up in a few, probably this week, if not the next, is my review of a role playing game that perfectly emulates a very specific type of video game. So it's a really awesome role playing game, quite crunchy, quite simulationist. And after that, I'm going to be reviewing a dark fantasy adventure for the Shadow of the Demon Lord RPG. I'm also going to be reviewing a role playing game that is a sort of steampunk. It could be considered a sort of a hybrid in that it combines steampunk with other themes because of the variety of the nations and cultures. Sometimes you have like old Wild West steampunk or horror steampunk, post-apocalypse steampunk, Victorian steampunk, sort of like Frozen North type of steampunk as well. So it's a really awesome role-playing game. So I will be bringing out those reviews pretty soon. Now, in this update, I want to take an opportunity or a chance to talk about replacing characters when they are killed in role-playing games. I think this video could be somewhat connected to a very old video, well, of about a couple of years back. It was a video response to Marco from the Multiverso Distópico channel. I'm going to put a link to his channel in the description below. And in that video, I talked about character death, but I realized that I didn't give too many specifics about how to replace characters when they die. So I'm going to give you some tips and advice on how I've been handling things throughout the years. Maybe you will find them useful. Well, depending on the type of role-playing game that you are running, the death of a player character could have a larger impact or a lesser impact. Like, for example, if you're playing a role-playing game like old school Dungeons and Dragons or any of the retro clones or pseudo clones, because usually those adventures and campaigns are focused on or centered around the plotline or a specific adventure site like a dungeon or a mega dungeon, the death of a character is at times, if not inconsequential, not as important when it comes to damaging the entire plotline. That is, if you're going into this sort of maze of crypts where there is this powerful league or a mummy or a vampire, that's like the main thing of the adventure. The adventure almost has nothing to do with the player character's family or his friends, his allies, or his emotional turmoil. It's all about the dungeon, what lies within that dungeon, what's the threat, etc. But in some other games, like for example old World of Darkness type of games like Vampire the Masquerade and such, they are quite heavily driven by the character's background, the personal history of that character, and of course how it combines with the setting as well. But sometimes the character's background is so intertwined or meshed with the main plotline that if that character dies, you have to do some major emergency changes to the entire chronicle. So you can see how it affects different types of role-playing game experiences. I'm going to give you mechanical and thematical tips on how to replace player characters without having the entire thing falling apart, or without lessening or diminishing the fun or the believability of the story. So let's say that you are creating a character for Dungeons and Dragons or old school Dungeons and Dragons for simplicity's sake. It's a bit easier because mechanically speaking, you handle things by class levels. So if you have a fighter of level 5 or 6 and that fighter dies, it's quite easy to replace him just creating another character around that particular level, even if it's a character from a different class. But if you are handling a system that organizes the power levels of the characters by ranks or by tiers, it's a bit more difficult because usually those systems are point buy systems or point distribution systems. And sometimes perhaps two or three characters in at the same tier or in the same rank of power, they are still quite different from each other in terms of resources and personal abilities. Because sometimes perhaps you have a character that just reached tier 3 and he just purchased with his experience points or adventure points or whatever it is being handled, he just purchased this attribute to be stronger or faster. But there is another character in that same tier, in tier 3, that has already made several purchases. Maybe he has boosted or enhanced his skills, his special powers, spells, his attributes as well. And maybe there is another character that is just about to leave tier 3 and go into tier 4. Maybe that character has several spells and powers and abilities and feats and whatnot, so they are still quite different from each other. So in the case of a Dungeons and Dragons type of game, it's very easy, mechanically speaking, to replace a character because you only need to keep track of the level of experience. You know those adventure modules that you purchase that it says an adventure for characters, for 4-player characters between levels 5 to 7. So that means you only need a player character that replaces the dead player character that is of level 5, 6, or 7. I would recommend that when a character dies and a new character is created, you create a character of one level lower or a couple of levels lower than the dead character. Otherwise, the death doesn't feel as significant. It only feels like a small setback. But when your character dies and you know that your next character is going to be weaker, then the blow is a bit more significant. Only perhaps in campaigns where there is some sort of time limit, then I would recommend that you only lower the level of the newly created character by one step. That is, if you had 5th level character, you create a 4th level character. Because if you create a 3rd level character and there is some sort of time limit, maybe there is some sort of evil ruler that is about to activate some artifact to unleash some sort of pandemic upon the world, and you have just a few days to stop him, then the party is not going to have enough time to level up the newly created player character. Because otherwise, if you have no time limit and the new character is only level 3 and the adventure needs a level 5 character, the entire group could go on another adventure. Maybe they could hex crawl a bit, go around the map, having other encounters, perhaps even gaining some levels for the other members of the party and obtaining some powerful items as well. So it's a win-win situation. You get more adventures and you obtain some rewards as well. But when it comes to these other systems of point buy systems and point distribution type of system, I would strongly recommend that from the very start, when you create your character and when you start to level that character up, that you keep track, that each player keeps track of the adventure points or experience points that they obtain throughout the campaign, and they keep track also of how they spend those points. Because that way, when your player character dies, you already know how many more points the game master needs to give to that newly created character, so that that character is not too far away in terms of power from the other adventurers. I would recommend that you give 20% less points or 30% points less when you award those, rather you hand out those adventure points or experience points to the newly created character, so that you still feel that impact of dying. Now, I'm going to talk about some thematic ways on how to introduce newly created characters into the adventure, because this is potentially a problem both in more, let's say, character-driven storylines and those adventures and campaigns that are more focused on the world and the adventure side. Because, for example, in a Dungeons and Dragons type of experience, let's say that the fighter of the group dies, and you keep walking inside that mega dungeon, and you turn around the corner or you open the door and there is a new player character just waiting to join the group. So that's quite absurd. How are you going to trust that new character that just appeared in the most dangerous site that you are adventuring into? It doesn't make sense. And even if you, for example, you come up with the excuse that, oh, it's my old friend Billy or my brother Tommy, what's he doing here or something, no? So it's somewhat ridiculous. And in a game that has powerful links between the plotline and the personal history of each character, it's even more of a problem, because now you need to find a way to connect the story, the background, the nature, and the demeanor of the newly created character with the current plotline. It's quite difficult. So these are my following recommendations that can be used both in character-driven stories and adventure site-driven stories. Let's say that you are playing a generic fantasy game, a medieval fantasy game of your choice. It could be anything. And it could be any sort of system, character-driven or more focused on the world and the adventure side. Let's say that you have a party of adventurers, and one of those adventurers is Tommy the Fighter. Tommy the Fighter should, at the very start, just after character creation, dedicate a few lines to one of his relatives or friends that could serve as potential replacements in case Tommy gets killed. This is pretty common in role-playing games. They even have a space in some character sheets where you need to write the family member or friend or whatever to replace you in case the character dies. But I would strongly recommend that you write down some lines explaining why that character couldn't go adventuring with the group, and clarify if that character is known by the other members of the group. I would recommend that most of the other members in the party should already be familiar with Tommy's cousin Vinny. Let's say that Tommy the Fighter has a cousin named Vinny. So let's say that the player controlling Tommy the Fighter writes down, cousin Vinny couldn't go adventuring because he had to take care of his sick brother, and he decided to join an order of the Arthur, the god of paladins. And even though cousin Vinny has what it takes to go adventuring, he had to stay behind to take care of his sick brother or something like that. So now you have an excuse as to why cousin Vinny didn't go with the adventuring group, but cousin Vinny already has that background that because he belongs to this order of the god of paladins, he's probably quite capable in adventure situations, in expeditions and combats and such. And so the group goes on, and if Fighter Tommy gets killed in the starting adventure, you can easily replace him with cousin Vinny. Maybe his brother felt better and he's all well and healthy, and now Vinny can go adventuring with the rest of the group. But if Fighter Tommy survives the first adventure and perhaps many more, I would recommend that every couple of levels he dedicates a few more lines to the to cousin Vinny's feats and stories and his personal goals, because that way you feel like cousin Vinny is actually a person existing in that world, a real adventurer, so to speak, and he's not going to appear just out of nowhere. So maybe Tommy the Fighter got to level 3 and he writes down, oh, last time when I was at the inn, a letter or a message that arrived, and it was cousin Vinny, and he told me that after his brother got better, the order of the god of paladins sent him on a quest to protect a village because they had a problem with a group of zombies that were animated because of some strange fungi that just basically animated the zombies, and they started to eat people and such. But cousin Vinny discovered that there were some strange rodents nearby that enjoyed eating carrion and undead, and he managed to capture several of those, a whole group of those rodents, and unleash them upon the zombies. So he had an easier time fighting the zombies. So that's an interesting story for cousin Vinny. You can see that he is quite capable in handling all sorts of dangerous situations, and because Fighter Tommy is learning some things, some strategies and tactics, I would also recommend that you, as a game master, or dungeon master award the players with some experience points, perhaps a small quantity of experience points, just to represent that the characters are learning from the exploits of their friends and family, and also to reward the player because he's coming up with some interesting stories for the campaign. So that way, when Fire Tommy finally dies, maybe Tommy got killed because the group was fighting this cult of the bad bear or something, and they unleashed dire bears that are even stronger than your average dire bear, and he got mauled by this beast. And now Cousin Vinny arrives, and everybody already knows who Cousin Vinny is because the player has been sharing Cousin Vinny's story with the rest of the group. They already know his exploits, how capable he is, and it's not nonsensical that he suddenly appears out of nowhere. And maybe Cousin Vinny arrived just in time when Tommy died because maybe he had a bad feeling about what was going to happen to his cousin, or maybe Tommy didn't tell the other members of the group that Vinny was just about to arrive. It was going to be a surprise. So you can come up with any sort of excuse, but it's more plausible because you already have that established background for Cousin Vinny. I would also recommend that you keep the abilities and the class. That is, if you are handling a system based on archetypes or a point-buy system, point distribution system, you do not talk too much about the specific abilities and powers of the replacement player character. And if you are playing a class-based system, do not talk about the class itself. That way, if the group considers that a class is more useful at a particular stage in the campaign, or in the case of the point-buy system, they think that a set of abilities and powers are going to be more useful in that particular section of the campaign, the newly created player character could be created as the needed class, or with the appropriate set of skills and abilities and attributes. So for example, in the case of Cousin Vinny, you know that he belongs to this order that follows Arthur, the god of paladins. And maybe if you need a tank, maybe you think that Tommy was doing a great job as a tank and you need a replacement frontliner. Maybe Vinny actually turned out to be a paladin. But what if you decided that you need a rogue in the team? Maybe you have a bard that isn't doing such a great job at finding traps and such. Maybe Tommy died because he activated a trap before the encounter with the dire bear and he got into the fight wounded. So now you can create a rogue and mention that the Order of Arthur actually has like a special ops type of team, or rogues and scoundrels that actually support the Order from the shadows. Or maybe you decided that there were too many magical effects and spells that were causing harm and weakening the group throughout the entire adventure or the entire campaign. You could introduce Vinny as a spellcaster because, of course, the Order of Arthur, the god of paladins, is also protected by a cabal of wizards that protects the order from all sorts of vile sorceries. So that way it's very easy to insert that newly created player character into the adventure or the campaign. If you need further inspiration, there is this is going to contain a bit of spoilers for a particular anime and manga series, Tokyo Ghoul. Many of you probably know about it, but the plotline itself is not important. I wanted to talk about a particular character, which is Arima. Tokyo Ghoul basically is about ghouls and humans clashing. Ghouls, but these are very powerful ghouls. These are not your typical Dungeons and Dragons ghouls that just paralyze people. They're kind of like super cannibals with really over-the-top abilities. But there's also like some conflict about the possibility of achieving some sort of peace between humans and ghouls. But suffice to say, most of the conflicts revolve around humans fighting ghouls. And there is this very powerful, very skilled hunter of ghouls, you could say, known as Arima. You almost know nothing about him. They just give you like some bits of information that, oh, Arima, he's the best hunter, he's the most powerful agent, he's the greatest warrior, and they talk about his exploits. Sometimes some characters have small flashbacks when you see Arima fighting against this really powerful ghoul. And so you start to get that build up for the character. If that were to be a role-playing game, Arima could be like that replacement character that sometimes you'll write some lines for that replacement character talking about his exploits and his background. So you start to get really hyped. You want to see Arima in action, and it is only at the end of the I don't know, I don't remember if it was the first arc or the second arc, when Arima finally makes an appearance, and that's when a group of humans are fighting this really powerful ghoul, and several humans have died, so those could be dead player characters. And then Arima arrives to the rescue, so now you see Arima in action and you get so excited. And this also eliminates, for example, if it were to be a role-playing game, it eliminates that sense of dissatisfaction when perhaps you are quite ahead in your campaign and suddenly your player character dies, and you have this new replacement player character that it feels so disconnected from the player and from the group because you barely know about that character. So let's say that you are playing the Dungeons and Dragons module of City of the Spider Queen, and you're about to fight against the Spider Queen herself, the main villain. And sorry, that was not the Spider Queen, it was a sorceress. I don't want to give too many spoilers because it has to do with the adventure. I was confusing things. But well, you're going to fight the main villain and your character dies before that, and now you have this newly created player character. You're going to feel so disappointed that he almost feels like completely separated or disconnected from the storyline. But because you have been, in case you used my tips, that you write down the story as you level up, you're going to feel like you already know this character and you can't wait to get him into the action, potentially saving the group as well. So I hope these tips and advice on how to introduce replacement player characters will assist you in some way. Maybe some of you have better tips about this. I recommend that you write them down in the description below, or that you make a video response and share them with us, because maybe they are more useful than what I have shared today. But in case this serves even as inspiration to better replace player characters when they die during the course of an adventure or a campaign, I hope it is useful to you in some way. Well, thanks for watching this video. I'll try to bring out those reviews as fast as possible. I'll try to bring out the next review this week, if not the next week. If you have any comments or questions about what I talked about today, please let me know. And thank you so much to those that have been sending Drive-Thru-RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.